My name is Rowena. I used to think being a good daughter just meant showing up, saying yes, and not making too much noise. For most of my life, I believed that keeping the peace was more important than being at peace. But there came a moment, a quiet one, not loud or dramatic, when I looked around and realized maybe I'd been keeping the wrong kind of peace. Maybe the cost of staying quiet was far greater than I thought. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I still remember the day I realized silence could echo. It was early November in Tacoma, the kind of fall day where the air sits heavy even without rain. Everything felt still, like the world was pausing for something I hadn't quite caught up to yet. There was no dramatic event, no door slammed or voice raised. Just a phone call, and a few sentences that left a crack inside me I couldn't patch up. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, the one by the window that faced Wright Park. I'd lived in this apartment for almost 10 years. A modest one-bedroom, nothing fancy, but it was clean and quiet. Two things I'd come to appreciate more than most. I had always kept things steady, went to work on time, kept my grocery receipts filed, sent birthday cards to people who never sent them back, and every month, without fail, I transferred $4,000 to my parents' joint account in Florida. No one asked me to, not formally anyway, but it was understood. They had retired early, Dad had back problems, Mom said she was done with the corporate world, and I was the reliable daughter. The one who stayed, the one who didn't make waves. They lived in Naples now, gated community, near the beach, the kind of place with scheduled yoga, poolside drinks, and more golf carts than cars. I'd never visited. They never invited. Every now and then, I'd get texts like, "Your car didn't go through at the spa today. Can you check?" Or, "Rent just went up here. Keep that in mind." Never a thank you. Not even a, "Would you mind?" Just lines that felt more like invoices than messages from parents. I told myself it was just their way, that they'd earned their peace, that it was fine. Then I lost my job. It wasn't even personal. The company, Linwood Concepts, was restructuring, and I was part of the group they called non-essential to future growth. I nodded through the exit interview like it was happening to someone else. That evening, I stared at my phone for an hour before calling my parents. I'd never asked them for anything, not since I was 17. But rent was due in 2 weeks, and my emergency fund wasn't as padded as it should have been. When Dad answered, I heard laughter in the background. Music. The clink of ice in a glass. "Hey," I said quietly. "I didn't want to bother you, but I got laid off today, just temporarily. I was wondering if you could help. Just for 1 month. $1,000 would really help until I figure things out." There was a pause. Then Mom's voice in the background. "Who is it?" Dad covered the receiver, muffled talking. Then he came back on. "We're in Florida," he said, like I'd somehow forgotten. "Don't ruin the vibe, okay? We just got here." "I know," I replied. "I wouldn't ask if—" "You're making us feel guilty," he interrupted, sharper this time. "We're finally living. Don't drag us back into your problems." Click. No goodbye. No, "We'll talk later." Just off. I sat there, phone still in hand. The kitchen suddenly too quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone walked their dog in a red coat. I watched the leash tighten and slacken with each step. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, not right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked their Facebook page. There they were, my parents, smiling in white robes at a high-end spa, toes dipped in some mineral pool, captioned with 3 words. Finally, freedom. Something about that line. It wasn't new. It tugged at something old inside me, a phrase I hadn't thought about in years. I opened an old folder in my inbox. There, buried between emails from 2015, was one I had never opened. From my sister Lena. We hadn't spoken in almost a decade. She left without much warning, and I'd believed what Mom said, that Lena was difficult, ungrateful, unfilial. But her subject line had stuck with me. I had to go. Now I opened it. And there it was, in her final paragraph. I needed to breathe. I needed to feel free. Finally, freedom. I closed the laptop slowly. That was the first moment I realized I wasn't mad at her anymore. For the first time since she left, I understood why she had to. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to understand why I might have to, too. The strange thing was, I didn't feel angry. Not even sad, really. Just quiet. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything inside me. My thoughts, my hopes, even my instincts. It was a kind of cold awareness, the kind that doesn't come with fireworks, only a slow, persistent ache, the kind you carry in your bones. I kept going through the motions, got up, got dressed, made coffee, sent out a few resumes, fed the neighbor's cat while she was on a cruise. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted, like a window had opened and let in air I didn't ask for. I walked to Anchor's Corner that afternoon. It was a small cafe tucked into the corner of an old brick building near 12th and Grant. I'd been coming there for years, never often enough to be recognized, but enough to know where they kept the good napkins and which seats didn't wobble. That day, I chose the window seat, the one with the faded cushion and a view of the crosswalk where the light takes too long to change. I ordered an espresso over ice without thinking, even though it was 48 degrees outside. A few minutes later, a familiar voice said, "That's new! You don't seem like someone who drinks iced coffee in sweater weather." I looked up and saw him, Denny Lovell. He was wiping his hands on a dish towel, the same olive green apron tied around his waist. Tall, a little scruffy, early 40s maybe. We'd met once, about a year ago, when my car battery died right in front of his cafe. He offered me a jump and didn't say much else. I smiled barely. Maybe I'm full of surprises. He tilted his head, thoughtful. Then he turned and came back a minute later. Not with my espresso, but with a steaming mug. "Hot cocoa," he said, setting it down gently. "You looked like someone who could use warmth, not caffeine." I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it again. He was right. "Thanks," I murmured. He sat across from me, not asking for permission, but not assuming too much either. Just there. Present. "My mom used to say," he began, stirring his own drink, "that being a parent doesn't mean being owed. She had Alzheimer's for the last 5 years of her life. Some days she didn't know who I was. But when she did, she always said the same thing. Don't let love become a leash." I didn't respond. Just stared at the swirl of cream on top of the cocoa, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. He added softly, "I guess what I'm saying is, it's okay to stop giving when it starts costing more than it should." That was the first time someone said it out loud. The first time I didn't feel like a monster for thinking it. I stayed there for almost an hour, sipping slowly, watching people come and go. When I finally got up to leave, Denny nodded once, as if he understood something I hadn't even said. At home, I felt an itch to clean. Not surfaces, but memories. I opened my email, went to the folder marked Family, and scrolled down. There it was, an unopened message from Lena, dated July 2015. Subject line, "I had to go." I hesitated. Back then, I couldn't bring myself to read it. I was angry with her, confused. I believed what our parents said, that she was selfish, difficult, ungrateful, that she'd walked away from responsibility. Now, my hand didn't even tremble as I clicked. The message was short, but each word carried a kind of tired truth. "I know you think I abandoned them. Maybe I did. But it was either that or abandon myself. I didn't leave because I didn't love. I left because I couldn't keep loving in a place where I wasn't allowed to breathe." Then the last line. "If the day ever comes when you're tired too, I hope you choose you, Rowena, not duty, you." I sat there for a long time after that. I didn't cry, but something inside me softened. I had judged Lena for so long, but in that moment, I felt closer to her than I had to anyone in years. Maybe she hadn't failed us. Maybe she'd just been first. It started with the texts. Not even 3 full days had passed since I canceled the monthly transfer and shut down their secondary credit card. I figured it would take a week, maybe more, for them to notice. But they caught it faster than I expected. The first message came through at 6:14 a.m., right around Mom's usual gym time. "What's going on? The card got declined at the club." That was followed by another, then another. "You know, rent is due this week, right? Are you seriously doing this? We didn't raise you to be this irresponsible." I didn't reply. I read them, let them sit there like unopened bills, stacking up in digital silence. By noon, they'd sent 5 more. The tone shifted from confused to accusatory. Guilt-laced jabs masked as concern. Passive-aggressive demands wrapped in the language of obligation. I turned off notifications and let my phone vibrate itself across the dining table. What surprised me wasn't their reaction. It was mine. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel the familiar urge to fix it, to send an apology just to smooth the air. I felt calm. Not strong, not triumphant. Just calm. Hollowed out in a way that felt oddly clean. I had imagined this moment before, in vague daydreams, quiet thoughts after long days when their expectations felt especially heavy. But living it was different. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like slipping out of a coat that had grown too tight. They weren't used to silence from me. I was the explainer, the smoother over, the one who made peace even when I was bleeding inside. I had spent most of my life managing their emotions, like it was part of my job description as a daughter. But not this time. By Friday, I still hadn't responded. I was updating my resume, again, trying to rewrite my career story into something future employers might find attractive, when my phone rang. Molly, an old coworker from Linwood Concepts. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious. "This is a little weird, but your parents called the office." I blinked. "They did what?" "They asked to speak with HR. Said you might be having some sort of breakdown? That you were mentally unwell after the layoff. I guess they didn't realize you don't work here anymore." I sat completely still. "They told my manager you'd always been emotionally fragile and that someone should check on you." Honestly, it felt less like concern and more like control. Her voice faded as my ears rang. They'd crossed a line. Not just with me, but with my name, my reputation. They'd gone from disappointed parents to people willing to smear me if it meant regaining control. I thanked Molly and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cabinets. My tea had gone cold. Everything inside me felt sharper, clearer. It was never going to stop. Not until I made it impossible to continue. I opened my laptop, logged into my Bayshore Federal Credit Union account, and began the process of revoking all dependent access. I flagged recent charges for review: spa services, boutique home goods, high-end restaurants. None of it was essential. None of it was what I'd ever intended to support. I downloaded statements, highlighted key expenses, sorted everything into folders. I wasn't doing this to lash out. I was doing it to close the chapter properly, with documentation, not emotion. Then I wrote the shortest email I'd ever sent them. Subject: Financial changes. I can't keep being your income and your daughter at the same time. If I'm only valuable to you when I'm sending money, then maybe what we had was never really family. I wish you well, Rowena. I didn't reread it, didn't edit or wonder if I sounded cold. I just hit send. And that, more than the texts, more than canceling the card, was the moment it became real. It felt like I'd drawn a line in the sand, and for once, meant it. I expected a response, a long email, maybe even a voicemail full of shaky breathing and disappointment. But for once, they didn't respond immediately. The hours passed. The silence grew. It wasn't comfortable, not at first, but it wasn't unbearable either. I made tea, sat on the floor, let the weight of my own decision settle in my chest like something earned. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew I had said no. And no was a word I'd never allowed myself to speak to them before. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound loud. But it felt like freedom. The email came in the middle of a quiet afternoon. No subject line, just a PDF attachment labeled Notice of Obligation. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, as if waiting for it to delete itself. Eventually, I clicked. It was 2 pages, dressed up in formal language, that sounded like it had been copy-pasted from a template used by people who thought legal tone equaled moral high ground. There was even a digital signature at the bottom, both of their names, like they were co-signing a business deal. According to them, I had made verbal assurances of lifetime financial support and had committed to ensuring their post-retirement welfare. They were requesting repayment for the months I'd stopped sending money and warning that if I didn't resume support within 30 days, they would seek counsel for further action. They used words like breach, commitment, dereliction of familial duty. I read the document 3 times, not because I didn't understand it the first time, but because a part of me didn't want to believe they'd go this far. But they had. And that's when it truly hit me, not as a sharp pain, but as a slow, undeniable realization. They didn't want me back. They wanted what I used to provide: money, access, stability, a daughter who paid her dues and stayed quiet. Not once did they ask how I was doing. Not once did they acknowledge the years I carried their burden like it was a family heirloom. It was never about love. It was about leverage. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. For a long time, I just sat there, breathing in the stillness of my apartment, surrounded by furniture I bought with my own hands, bills I paid without reminders, and quiet I no longer feared. Memories floated up like smoke. Dad's back surgery, the time I covered the hospital bills without hesitation, the down payment on their retirement condo, the endless checks for things they called temporary, but somehow never stopped needing. I thought of the time I made excuses to Lena, told her I couldn't understand how she'd walked away. I'm not like her, I'd once told myself. I'm not cold. I don't abandon. But sitting there now, a legal threat still open on my screen, I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. What if Lena hadn't walked away? What if she just stopped trying to hold on to something that was never hers to keep? That evening, I found myself back at Anchor's Corner. It was later than usual. Most of the tables were empty. The lights were dimmed low, music soft enough to disappear into thought. Denny was cleaning up behind the counter. He saw me come in, gave me a nod, and brought over a warm cup of something I didn't name. I took a sip, cinnamon and something earthy. He sat down across from me, elbows on the table, and after a few quiet minutes, he asked, "If someone doesn't love you the way you need to be loved, are you still responsible for staying?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because in that moment, the question itself felt like the answer. I left the cafe just after 9. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel small. But that night, it felt like space. Breathing room. When I got home, I opened a draft email I hadn't touched in years. The "to" field still held Lena's old address. I didn't know if she'd changed it. I didn't care. I typed slowly, deliberately. "If this still reaches you, I just want you to know, I understand now. I get why you left. I'm sorry it took me so long. If you're open to it, maybe we can be sisters again. Not daughters. Just us. Your sister, Rowena." I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I closed the laptop, made tea, and sat by the window, watching the last of the streetlights flicker on. I wasn't waiting for her reply. I just needed her to know. I had finally come to meet her where she had stood all those years ago. And I wasn't ashamed. It was a Sunday morning, just after 7. I was making toast, the kind with too much butter and not enough reason. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floor settling. Then the phone rang. It was Mom. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, My thumb hovered over decline, heart beating with a rhythm I knew too well. Old habits are like old wounds. They don't close just because you stop touching them. I answered. Hi, I said quietly. Her voice came through too sweet, too careful, like honey poured over something she knew might break. Sweetheart, she began, I've been thinking, maybe we all got a little carried away. You know, emotions, misunderstandings. But it doesn't have to be like this. I didn't reply. The toast popped up behind me. I didn't move. You can undo this, Rowena, she continued, her tone sliding into something rehearsed. You can fix it. We can start fresh. We're family, after all. You don't just walk away from family. That word, family, used to do something to me. It used to soften everything, make me shrink back into obedience, make me forget what I needed. But now, it landed like a weight I didn't want to carry anymore. Her voice kept moving, but I stopped listening somewhere in the middle. It was like she was speaking from another room entirely, another version of reality where I still played the role they'd written for me. And in that stillness, something surprising happened. The guilt started to rise. Yes, it always did. But this time, it didn't drown me. It didn't crush me under its weight. Because rising right alongside it was something steadier. Resolve. When I finally hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't pace or replay the call 100 times. I just stood in the kitchen, eyes on the blank screen, and let the quiet do what it does best. Tell me the truth. That afternoon, I texted Lena. We'd been talking more lately. Nothing deep, just rebuilding in tiny pieces. A meme here, a photo of her dog curled up in her suitcase, a recipe she said tasted like childhood. I told her about the call. She replied almost immediately. They pulled the same line on me, she wrote. Only difference was, I believed it longer than I should have. I hesitated. Then I typed what I'd been wondering since the beginning. Did you ever send them money before you left? There was a pause. Then, yes. Over $60,000. Credit cards, late bills, some rehab debt they never admitted to. I was drowning. And when I said I needed a break, they told me I was selfish, said I'd let the family fall apart. They threatened to tell everyone I'd abandoned them. I read that message 3 times. And something in me settled. Not in defeat, but in clarity. It wasn't just me. It never was. This wasn't an isolated falling out. It was a pattern. A system that ran on guilt, fueled by daughters who were taught to confuse love with loyalty, even when it cost them everything. But I wasn't Lena 10 years ago, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly. Over the next 2 days, I went through my records, bank statements, receipts, emails, notes scribbled on the backs of envelopes. I printed it all, highlighted, annotated, marked the dates, the vendors, spa charges made with the card in my name, vacation rentals I never stayed in, medical expenses I never saw the receipts for. A full year of silence, disguised as love. I scanned everything into a drive, labeled the folder for legal review, and sent it to Lena's lawyer in San Diego, the same man she told me had helped her walk away without looking back. I didn't send it because I expected a lawsuit. I wasn't afraid of one either. I sent it because this time, I wasn't going to leave the truth open for debate. After I clicked send, I sat back in my chair and looked around. Same furniture, same beige walls. But something was different. The space felt mine again. For years, I'd tried to fix a relationship I thought was fractured. But now, I saw it wasn't broken. It was built on terms I could no longer live with. It was never a bond. It was an agreement. Transactional, conditional, performed. But what I was building now, with Lena, with myself, was something else entirely. It was real. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. The flight to Florida was uneventful. No turbulence, no delays, no crying babies. Just me, a book I didn't read, and a weight in my chest that seemed to grow heavier with every mile I flew closer to them. I kept turning the same page over and over, not because I was distracted, but because I was rehearsing. Rehearsing silence. Rehearsing stillness. I didn't tell them I was coming. No calls, no warnings. I didn't make a plan beyond showing up. I didn't even book a return flight. I just knew I needed to look them in the eye. Not to argue, not to beg, but to say aloud what I had only ever said in the quiet of my own mind. When I landed in Naples, the light hit me with that Florida kind of intensity. Bright, golden, unapologetic. Palms lined the streets like they were posing for postcards. Everything was clean, curated, calm. The kind of calm that's staged for visitors and maintained for appearances. To me, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt performative. It was the same neighborhood, the same gated community tucked neatly between a manicured golf course and a man-made lake. Perfectly sterile, perfectly quiet. The kind of place where neighbors wave politely, but never ask what you're running from. I sat silent in the cab, fingers pressed against my knees. The driver said, "Nice day," and I nodded, but my mind was already 3 doors ahead. When I rang the doorbell, there was a long pause. Then Mom's voice, muffled, "Who is it?" "It's me." A beat. Then the sound of footsteps, slow and uncertain. The door creaked open. She looked surprised, but not shocked. Like she had expected I might show up eventually, just not today. Dad appeared behind her, arms crossed, frown ready. He looked at me like I was a meeting he didn't want to attend. "Rowena?" she said, her voice half curious, half wary. "I won't take much of your time," I said, stepping inside before they could answer. The house hadn't changed. Beige walls, seashell accents, a faint scent of lavender and furniture polish. The air was thick with unspoken things. I walked straight to the dining table and sat down. They followed, slowly. I reached into my bag, pulled out a plain white envelope, and laid it gently on the polished wood between us. "This is a printed copy of the notice I sent to the credit union. I've officially ended all financial responsibility. I've also submitted supporting documentation of previous spending for internal review." Dad stared at it like it was something contagious, like if he touched it, he'd lose control. I kept speaking, calm, steady. I'd rehearsed this part. "There will be no more transfers, no more shared cards. If I receive any additional threats or legal language, I'll respond through counsel." Mom blinked rapidly. "Are you serious right now?" "I am." She shook her head slightly. "This isn't how family behaves. You don't just cut people off. You don't just walk away." I met her eyes. "That depends on what you believe family means. Because to me, it's not maintained by guilt or bank accounts. It's built on respect." Dad leaned forward, voice low but tight. "After everything we've done for you." I didn't flinch. "You did what parents are supposed to do. You raised me. I've returned that care tenfold, even when it was never acknowledged. That debt, if it existed, is more than paid." Mom's face softened. Her lips trembled. I could see the tears forming. She knew how to time them well. "Are you really going to leave us like this?" she whispered. "After everything we've been through?" I took a breath that came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. I'm not leaving you. I'm just not leaving myself behind anymore." Silence fell over the table like dust. For the first time, they didn't recognize the person sitting across from them. I wasn't the apologetic daughter, the peacemaker, the financial safety net. I wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore. Dad stood up, fast and rigid. He shoved the envelope off the table. It slid to the floor and landed face down. "Fine," he muttered, already walking out of the room. Mom didn't move. She looked like she was waiting for me to cave, to cry, to apologize. But I didn't. Her sadness hovered. But I didn't let it land on me. Not this time. I stood, picked up my bag, adjusted the strap. "I wish you peace," I said softly. "I really do. But I won't trade myself for it anymore." She didn't answer. She didn't follow me. The door clicked shut behind me. Outside, the air was heavy with jasmine and chlorine. The sun was still warm. Everything around me looked postcard perfect. But I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel broken. I walked down their path like someone finally stepping out of costume, and I didn't look back, not once. The final email came with a subject line that felt like a threat all by itself. Action required. Family obligations. I didn't open it right away. I sat there for a while, just staring at the words, letting the weight of them wash over me. I already knew what was inside. I didn't need to read it to feel the familiar punch. When I finally clicked, it was exactly what I expected. Clean formatting, bolded phrases like breach of familial responsibility, and failure to uphold previously implied support terms. They were demanding repayment for the last 6 months, every single dollar I had stopped sending. Attached was a PDF labeled Notice of Intent. It had a watermark, signatures at the bottom, and language designed to sound like legal firepower. It wasn't. But that didn't stop the sting. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading. I just forwarded it to Lena's lawyer and typed a single line beneath it. Let me know if this needs a response. Otherwise, I'm done. Then I shut the laptop, exhaled slowly, and sat in silence long enough to feel the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. It didn't comfort me, not yet, but it didn't scare me anymore either. Later that day, Lena sent me a text. Just a photo. It was a screenshot of a message Mom had sent her. Your father and I are in trouble. We need you. Please don't let this family fall apart completely. Same message, different daughter. Different decade, same manipulation. I stared at the screen for a long time before I typed back, Did you respond? Her reply came instantly. No, not this time. Then another message followed. Just one line. I don't feel guilty anymore, and you don't have to either. I read that over and over again. And with each read, something inside me finally loosened. Not like a snap. More like a knot slowly giving way after years of tension. That was the moment I knew it was really over. Not just the money. Not just the contact. The power. They no longer had a claim on my thoughts, my shame, or my silence. Over the next 2 days, I cleared out everything. Closed the last joint account. Changed my phone number. Created a new email address. One I'd only give to my lawyer, and a handful of people I actually trusted. I logged out of the family calendar. Left the group chat. Unsubscribed from the shared streaming services I'd been paying for, but hadn't touched in months. Each small act felt like snipping a thread I hadn't realized was still tangled around me. There was no dramatic ending, no door slammed, no fireworks of finality, just peace. A peace that came not from resolution, but from removal. Denny noticed. He always did. That night, I went to Anchor's Corner later than usual. The lights were dimmed, chairs turned upside down on tables. He was wiping the counter, humming something low under his breath. When he saw me, he didn't ask any questions. He just gave a nod and reached behind the counter. Poured something amber into a short glass and slid it toward me. It smelled like apples and cinnamon, and a memory I hadn't made yet. Hard cider, he said. Homemade, not too sweet. I took a sip. It was warm, smooth, grounding. He leaned on the bar, elbows resting easy. You look lighter. Do I? I asked. Yeah, like someone who finally put something heavy down. We sat like that for a while. No rush. No need to fill the air with noise. Then he said, I've seen people walk away from a lot. Jobs, cities, marriages. But I've never seen anyone choose solitude over loyalty when loyalty meant pain. He raised his glass slightly. That takes a different kind of courage. I didn't have words for that, so I just smiled. A real one. Not the polite kind I'd learned to perform, but something small and steady that came from deep inside. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was running from something or toward someone. I was just here, alone, but not lost, and not sorry. Winter in Tacoma isn't cruel. It doesn't bite or howl, it whispers. Gray skies hang low like quiet thoughts, and soft rain falls often. Not enough to soak you, but enough to slow you down. The trees look half undressed, holding onto leaves that should have let go weeks ago. It's a season that invites stillness, and I had finally learned how to sit with it. It had been 4 months since I last heard from my parents. No calls, no emails, not even a passive-aggressive article link pretending to be a peace offering. And yet, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like air, like space, like finally being able to exhale. I'd started working again. Holleridge Media wasn't glamorous. It was a small creative agency that handled branding for local businesses, a yoga studio, a bakery, a sustainable clothing shop. My days were simple, my hours flexible. No long nights, no heavy expectations, no pressure to prove anything. Most importantly, no one there knew the version of me who used to bend until she cracked. I liked that. I didn't talk about my past. I didn't need to explain why I sometimes stared at my phone longer than I should, waiting for a notification that never came, or why I had a habit of apologizing before making even small requests. I just worked, ate lunch, laughed a little, went home, slept. And it was enough. The lawyer had only followed up once. "They won't be pursuing legal action," he told me over the phone. "There's sufficient documentation showing excessive financial dependence and violation of agreed-upon boundaries." In other words, they backed down. They knew they had nothing, no apologies, no closure, just silence. And ironically, that was the most respectful thing they'd ever done for me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next guilt trip. I wasn't bracing for a knock disguised as concern. I wasn't trying to stay one step ahead of someone else's expectations. I was just living. A few weeks later, I bought an olive tree. It wasn't a plan. I was walking past a roadside nursery near Point Defiance and saw it standing there, short and scrappy, with a tag that read, "Mission Olive. Hardy. Drought-tolerant." It felt right. I brought it home and placed it near my east-facing window, where the morning sun lingered longest. I watered it every few days, clipped away dying leaves, and sometimes found myself talking to it without thinking. Not because I needed it to grow fast, just because I wanted it to grow. I didn't buy the tree for symbolism, but it found its way in anyway. It reminded me that not everything thriving needs applause. In February, Lena and I met in Oregon. We chose a quiet coastal town halfway between us and booked 2 nights at a little bed and breakfast with mismatched mugs, heavy quilts, and a host who made muffins from scratch. We didn't plan anything, didn't script it. We just showed up. That first night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in borrowed blankets, sipping spiced tea that tasted like cloves and honey. She reached for my hand without a word. I didn't pull away. "I used to think we'd never find our way back to each other," she said softly. "But maybe we were just walking parallel until the road curved." We didn't mention Mom and Dad, not because it was painful, but because it was unnecessary. That chapter wasn't ripped out. It was sealed, filed, archived. We talked about her dog, her sourdough starter, a book she couldn't finish. I told her about my new apartment, my favorite coffee from the office kitchen, the tiny olive tree by my window. We laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't leave a bruise. Before we left, she hugged me. A long, quiet hug that didn't need explanation. "I'm glad you found your way out," she whispered. "I didn't know I could," I told her. "Neither did I," she said. Until I did. Back in Tacoma, the chill had softened. I started walking again in the evenings. I made soup without looking at a recipe. I bought a new journal and didn't write about pain in it. Just groceries, dreams, small moments. I didn't post about healing. I didn't need to be praised for surviving something I never should have endured in the first place. I just needed to know I hadn't betrayed anyone by choosing myself. And I did know. I don't think I want to be called strong anymore. That word always felt like armor, something you wear because you expect another blow. I'm tired of bracing. I don't want to be impressive. I want to be free. Peace, for me, isn't loud. It's not declared. It's chosen. It's a morning without guilt. A cup of tea that stays warm. A version of myself I don't have to explain. Because sometimes the softest kind of self love is simply walking away from what convinced you that love was something to be earned. And sometimes that's not just enough, it's everything. I don't know what this story means to you, but for me, it was the first time I chose peace that didn't require permission. Maybe you've felt something similar. Maybe you've been the one who always stayed quiet, always gave more than you had. If so, I just want you to know you're not alone, and it's never too late to choose yourself. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. I'd love to walk this journey together.